morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for this session. As that video alluded to, this session now is all about career-focused education. It's something that's very close to my heart. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Steph McGovern. I'm the girl who gets up at 3:30 in the morning to do the business news on breakfast telly. I was expecting a bit of sympathy for that. Not from you guys. You all work much harder, I'm sure. But you know, in my job, I spend my life visiting companies all over the UK, all over the world in some respects, and they're constantly saying to me, you know, they want people who are skilled in lots of different ways. And similarly, from the research that Pearson's have done on this, it's parents want their children to come out of education with a variety of skills as well. So there, and particularly, you know, how that focuses into young people's careers. And there are concerns that the current system at the moment doesn't achieve that. So that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at whether combining academic and skills-based learning better equips young people for the future. We've got a wonderful expert panel for you of employers, policymakers, students and educators to discuss this. So let me tell you who we have. We've got Andrew Hammond, who's head teacher of Guildhall Feffner Primary School in Bury St Edmunds. Andrew's worked in schools for 20 years as a head teacher, deputy head, director of studies, house class. You've done it all, haven't you? Head of English, class teacher.
I'm 21 as well.
Yeah. In both independent and the maintained sectors as well. Prolific author as well. Andrew's written over 30 titles for various educational publishers, so coming at this from various angles. We've got Cindy Ramsod as well, who's Senior Vice President of BTEC and Apprenticeships at Pearson, of course responsible for the development of all of Pearson's UK technical, vocational and apprenticeship qualifications delivered by colleges, training providers and employers as well. Previous to this, Cindy has been a Deputy Principal of a college as well and been part of a number of projects with the Department for Education and held a number of senior roles in the commercial sector. Next up we've got John Cunningham, who leads the education arm for the Europe and Americas region at the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, which is of course the global body for professional accountants, as well as helping students to achieve vocational accounting qualifications. John's also responsible for the quality of the tuition provided and ensuring that the ACCA's qualifications remain practical and relevant across the wide and varied region. He's had a long career in education as well and qualification management, having previously held a variety of professional educational roles. Next up we have Natalie Pereira, who's Executive Director and Head of Research at the Education Policy Institute. Previous to this, Natalie worked in the government, both in the Deputy Prime Minister's Office and with the Department for Education, leading on a number of projects around school funding, which I know is something that you guys are certainly interested in. Natalie's also a school governor and director of Multi-Academy Trust in South London. Next up, we have Charlie Passy, who's an undergraduate at Swansea University, where he's studying for an electrical engineering degree. He's also a Chinese language student as well, so that's pretty impressive, isn't it? Charlie was originally working as a labourer on a building site when he was given the chance to complete a BTEC in electrical and mechanical engineering at North Devon College. And then I'm very pleased to say, in 2015, he won the Engineering BTEC Student of the Year Award. And he's going to be spending his summer in Shanghai on an internship with the British Council. So we've got a wealth of experience on this panel. What I want to start off with is I'm going to ask you guys a question. I'm also going to put it to the panel as well, but I'd love you to vote on this. So I know you've got the details that will be popping up on the screen of how to do that, the URL code that you need, and then you just pop in the details. And the question is career-focused education an unattainable myth? What are your thoughts on that? So if you can put in whether you think it is or isn't, and then we'll have a look at how you feel, and then I'll ask you the same question at the end as well once we've heard from everybody on the panel. So that will pop up shortly. It's an excuse to look at your phones, which is good. Just make sure they are on silent though. No, I'm pleased to say, 100% no. I'm hoping more than one person has voted. Yeah. So the answer we've got there, 100% no at the moment, which is good. So Andrew, do you want to kick us off on what your thoughts are on that question?
I think implicit in the question, I think if I read it rightly, is the shifting landscapes really, I suppose, economical, societal, technological, environmental changes and so forth, and how we can keep pace with that, technological particularly. And I think it probably brings to mind uniquely human skills that perhaps we need to be bringing to the fore. Obsolescence-proof, future-proofed human facets and capacities, which, as I say, I think are obsolescence-proof and are certainly future-proof and are never going to go out of date. And I think we probably need to focus not so much on, partly on what AI can do for us, but on what we can do that AI can't. And that brings us again back to those uniquely human facets and skills. And one of the reasons why I've spent my 21 years in teaching in primary schools and prep schools is precisely because that is where the engine room is located. It's called early years. And I'm a massive fan of early years. And I thought mischievously, I'd have a quick look last night again at the early years framework. And whether it's the case that the uniquely human skills and facets, which I believe are often defined as employability skills, soft skills, and so forth, whether they're actually in the early years framework, and I believe they are. And I think that they're in there because I think so many children, if not all, are factory fitted with them. They're innate within them by being human. And I think probably it isn't an unattainable myth if we can actually allow those natural skills, human tendencies and inclinations and curiosities to be fostered and to flourish rather than to be taught out of them. And I think if we could in some small way, and I've certainly tried to do it at the schools I've worked in, roll the genesis, the spirit of early years up through those years, I think they're the same relevance to a 15-year-old or a 5-year-old, or an 11-year-old or a 21-year-old. So I don't think it's an unattainable myth, but I do think we need to have a bit of a paradigm shift in terms of what education is for and what indeed it measures. I will just close with an Einstein quote already, but I mean, it's a lovely quote, isn't it, that Einstein said that the intuitive mind is a sacred gift and the rational mind is a faithful servant. And we've created a society that honours the servant and has forgotten the gift. And perhaps that's what days like today are all about.
Yeah, really, really good points you made there. We'll come back to some of those. Cindy, your thoughts?
So I kind of worry a little bit about the question in that defining career-focused education. I think in some ways, one thing that we should be careful of is that not becoming something that is seen as a standard or seen as the thing. And I agree with you. I think actually when we talk about career-focused education, what we're really talking about is what are the things that need to be in any education pathway that are preparing all young people and all children to be successful in their lives. And I go back to the parent poll that we did at Pearson, where parents talked about what they want for their kids in the future, and they want them to be happy. 97% we would really believe about that, worried about the 3%, but happy. And what they talked about a lot in the poll was actually the need for their kids to find work in the future and to be adaptable and flexible, but actually to have really fulfilled lives. And I think when we talk about career-focused education, what we're really talking about is how do we embed those skills, those behaviours, and nurture them from early years so that young people can succeed in their lives, be it careers or just life in general. So I think for me this question is more about what are we including as the kind of key learnings, I guess, or the key skills in education.
Yeah. Great, excellent. Well, again, we'll pick up on some of those comments after we've got everyone's thoughts. Go for it, John.
Hi everyone. I'm pleased to see the result of the poll. Let's start there. I thought we might be a difficult audience, but we're all agreed it's not an unobtainable myth, as the question teases out. It presupposes that we don't already have a career-based education system, and I think my argument would be we have a multifaceted education system. It's one of the beauties of the British approach to education. I'm involved with the Department for Education. I sit on one of these new T-level panels. I sit on the accounting panel developing the T-level. And the DFE has a narrative that as part of T-levels, we want to reduce qualifications for 16 to 19-year-olds. John, the problem is there's 13,000 qualifications targeted at 16 to 19-year-olds. And yes, to a degree, I think it makes sense for there to be some mopping up, but we have a rich tapestry in education, and we need to be quite careful that we don't proverbially throw out the baby with the bathwater in changing that system. So I think there's already a rich tapestry, and I guess that my background is very much in professional bodies, and the clue is in the title. They are all about different professionals. So I work for recently CIPD, the HR professional body, now the ACCA, the accounting professional body. And the idea is that we've got a portfolio of qualifications and education that helps to develop career-ready people. So I think, and we have, again, the beauty in the UK, we've got this whole tapestry of these professional bodies, professional institutes, who are working with other bodies, including Pearson. I'm invited here today from Pearson. I think I'm pleased, I guess as a synopsis, pleased that we agree that it's not unobtainable. I think let's also recognise there's a lot of good practice. That said, we don't need to be complacent. We always need to improve. And as Andrew says, I think with all the changes that are happening in the workplace, look, we're living longer, our careers are going to be longer. With the advent of digital, AI, and all of these disruptors that are coming, we need to constantly evolve our learning. But we're not in a bad place right now, would be my view.
Okay, look. Natalie.
Thank you. So let's take a step back a bit and think about what employers say that they want. In a recent really helpful survey that was published by the CBI in partnership with Pearson, it was really interesting that employers still very much value graduates, and in fact in the 12 months between or prior to participating in the survey, employers that employed graduates actually maintained or increased their level of graduates. But of course, employers also say they want more than just academic success. They really value technical skills as well as what we describe as softer skills, including self-efficacy, teamwork, resilience, etc. It really makes sense that they would be looking for both. So then the question is, how do we improve our education system so that it does genuinely deliver both the academic and the non-cognitive? And what the research body finds, and again my organisation did work for Pearson almost 2 years ago that reviewed the literature on this, is that you can't do the non-cognitive bit in isolation. You need to have both the academic and the non-cognitive together in a coherent programme, and that there's evidence that doing specific interventions doesn't have the desired impact. So we need to think about how we are teaching our young people we're teaching them mastery of knowledge, but also the application of that knowledge. And I was really pleased to hear that early years has been mentioned at least twice on the panel, because while you can't teach non-cognitive skills in isolation, what we do know is that the early years is where the brain is most malleable and where young children can start to pick up those non-cognitive skills. So I think we need to look at the education system, remove this arbitrary distinction between knowledge and skills, and consider the evidence that both really matter, but also focus our attention more in the early years.
Okay. Charlie.
Right, thank you everyone. So I think it would be attainable, because I think if it wasn't my path in education wouldn't be what it's been, I wouldn't be sat up here. So when I did a BTEC, it was very sort of mixed. It wasn't the academic route I'd tried previously, which hadn't worked for me. It mixed the academic for practical sense, which, as working from a building site, is a lot more accustomed to me. And I think it really gave me the confidence to then be able to go on to university, which is a very, very academic setting, and which previously I wouldn't have been able to do. So I'd say definitely it is attainable. And also looking at the focus in career education of preparation for career. And I think, especially when I was in secondary school and within now I'm in university, there's a huge push for preparation in industry. So how can we as students best prepare ourselves to work in a setting that we're going to be working in? So sort of best preparing ourselves for that, I'd say. So thank you.
Can I ask you, Charlie, obviously you left education and then you came back to it. Why did you come back to it? What was the draw? Because it sounded like your first kind of taste of education didn't go as you wanted, and then you came back. So what brought you back?
So I tried doing A-levels, so just sort of GCSEs, A-levels, the standard route, and it did not go well. But I think working on a building site as a labourer, just moving bricks, making cement, I felt I could possibly do more than that, and the opportunity to do just a solely practical based unit came up, and so it really just gave me the opportunity to get back into education, because it wasn't that I didn't want to be in education, it was that the opportunity to be there had gone from just trying the academic routes.
And did you feel like the time you came back again was a lot better than the first time?
Yes, it definitely went a lot better. It really gave me the skills to sort of progress in a more academic setting, because it wasn't just the practical skills, it gave me the foundation to retry academically.
Yeah, and so to keep asking you more about it, but because it's really important to have your voice in all of this, because you've experienced both sides of exactly what we're talking about. Did you at all, when you were doing your A-levels, know anything about the BTECs and everything? Had that been presented to you in any way, or?
It was presented. They did, when I was in secondary school, they did one BTEC, which was for sports education, but I think it was seen as a very negative route to take at the time.
Yeah.
But I think thankfully it's becoming a much more positively reinforced that it is a really good route we can be able to take.
Yeah, and John, just coming back to what you were saying, you talked about this multifaceted education system we have and the benefits of that. But as Charlie's kind of just, described there, it's a two-tier system, isn't it? And that's the problem. It's not, things aren't presented with equality. They're, A-levels and a thing. And if you can't do that, you go into vocational. Not in every establishment, but across the board.
And I think we've recently seen the Auger Review come out just a few weeks ago, and I think part of the purpose for the Auger Review was to look at trying, and the government has talked an awful lot, but clearly they haven't achieved this parity of esteem we love to talk about between HE and FE, between vocational and academic. Look, my view is it's good that the government recognised it's a challenge. Successive governments have recognised it's a challenge. It's good that the Auger Review, I'd probably have liked to have seen it gone a little bit further, but it's good that it does talk again about trying to have parity between the academic route. And it's good to see things like apprenticeships, T-levels are starting to grow in volumes. I think apprenticeships, I'm also involved in a couple of trailblazer apprenticeship groups, putting together apprenticeship standards in accounting, and it's good to see that putting employers more closely at the heart of systems to develop people who are much more work ready and ready to hit the ground running is at the centre, I think, of government policy. So I think it's moving in the right direction, but you're right, we're far from solving it right now.
Yeah, and isn't it annoying that the Prime Minister announces her support for FE the minute she's walking out the door? Hey, you're going to say something.
I was just going to say that for me, where we went wrong and where we can now go do it right is that as soon as, I'm not going to keep labouring the point about early years, I've made that point, but as soon as an early years child leaves early years and goes into Key Stage 1, straight away we start conflating the word performance with results, and particularly academic results. And the moment you conflate those two terms, all the innate attitudes, behaviours and capacities, what I call the real ABC, become eclipsed and hidden behind the grade, behind the academic grade. And that straight away sells short and does a gross injustice to those children's innately human capacities, those innately human skills and so forth, many of which are in direct demand when they get into the world of work. And the consequence of that conflation of performance and results I see year on year on year is that 16-year-olds and 18-year-olds, and I have 4 children, an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old, that have just gone through the attrition of exams. And as Rod said in the opening piece this morning, they are defining their own worth by the grades that they get. I'm lucky enough to have the opportunity to go to a lot of speech days, and I give out diplomas and colours to people twice my height, and they break my numbers when they shake my hand. And I look them in the eye, and it's very interesting to see the same vulnerability and the same nervousness and the same wonder, and actually buried deep the same awe and wonder as I see in the 5 and 6 year olds in my school. And what have we done? Why do we have a situation where they believe they're the sum of the grades they've achieved? If we can somehow extract those two terms of performance, which is entirely future-proof and obsolescence-proof, it's a lifelong performance, it's a lifelong learning performance, and not define it in those numerical percentage ways. Because whatever someone's computational capacity, and if they're in the 97th percentile of their intelligent quotient, it's not going to help them when they get to work. As a good friend of mine said to me not long ago, an A star in maths is brilliant, congratulations, genuinely, but how does it help you with your marriage? Well, it was never supposed to. So what was? Which was? Which of the subjects was? So it's part of a much bigger debate, which is concerned very much to do with those uniquely human skills that you will need. But they're there, they're already there.
Yeah, but how do you marry that with the fact that, Ofsted and the way that teachers are judged is based on, quite often on results?
It's
so therefore,
I understand, of course, that there is this in the erosion of trust that we seem to have had. I'm not going to sound too cynical, it's not in my nature to be like that, but there is a bit of an erosion of trust, let's be honest about that. So we need to verify that we're doing a good job, I understand that. But in so doing, we are only measuring the measurable. And I think if you look at earlier, as I said I wouldn't mention it, I have again, if you look at something like Tapestry or whatever device you use to look at those early learning goals, it's based on observation. The language needs to change. The language we use, the language of progress, the language of examination, of assessment, needs to shift to observation, to growth. But growth is a word that isn't used very much in schools. And nothing stifles growth more than sorting and ranking. So we need to look very closely at the words that we use to describe the growth in schools. The tomatoes in my greenhouse, I don't necessarily say that they've made progress, I say they've grown. A tomato is a deeply complex organism, but it isn't half as complex as a child. And yet we look at this idea of progress, and in order to make progress, by definition, you need to know where they've come from and where they're going. I have no idea where they're going. And that's what's so exciting.
Yeah, this is the second time someone's used a tomato analogy
Brilliant.
for a child as well on an education. Yeah, Cindy, go on, I know you want to jump in.
No, I was going to say that, when I spoke at the beginning and I said we need to be careful with labels, I think one of the things is that whatever pathway or whatever education route a child takes, it's about those qualities that are going to help them be successful in their lives. And you talked about, work or marriage. But I also think actually what we should be looking at more is where are sort of 24-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 35-year-olds in their lives? What's happening with underemployment in our society? What's happening with well-being and self-esteem? Because actually, they're all directly related to what we do and how we educate from early years all the way through. And if you look at some of the other economies around the world, I mean, you look at China, for example. I always use China as the example, but they have more graduates. China and India between them have more graduates than anywhere else in the world. And what they're recognising is that the system is failing in some way. So they've done brilliantly on productivity growth so far, but they're facing some real challenges. And what they're looking to do is introduce vocational education. And really, what they're really getting at, I think, is it's those skills. It's about those kind of life skills, those soft skills and hard skills. And it's that bit where they're looking at this X+1 model, where you might be a graduate, but you kind of go back and do something that might be at a lower level, which is about, how do you work in a team? How do you solve a problem? How do you communicate? And I think, Natalie's point about you can't separate them. I think career-focused education is a great kind of narrative to drive this agenda, but actually at the heart of this, it's about what are those skills, what are the attributes that we need as young people to have to be successful. And that's whatever the pathway, really.
So Natalie, how do you make sure we don't separate them? So for example, this morning I got one of many emails, like a press release, and it's about the unskilled jobs, which are the most popular, and it really annoyed me because all of those jobs I would class as skilled. So one was a hacker, one was a driver, and blah blah blah. And there is that issue of the soft skills, the communication versus the knowledge. So how do you stop that from being separated as two things?
So I think, as we've already touched upon, by international standards, we've got very high levels of accountability, and that seems to be what's driving behaviour in schools. So we have a fairly narrow curriculum, and again, by international standards, we have a narrow curriculum, particularly post-16. And also we have a system that does measure performance on exam results. And we know from the wealth of evidence that if you're going to have more rounded young people who are more ready to engage in whatever life brings them, then the curriculum needs to be broader, it needs to be well balanced. So I think that's the first place we need to look, a broad and balanced curriculum throughout secondary and into post-16, and a removal of the focus on test results as the only metric. I mean, I think it's an important metric because when we look at age, when we look at young people up to the age of, I think it was 34, if they had 5 or more good GCSEs, then they were 80% more likely to be employed compared to just under 2/3 if they didn't have those qualifications.
Is that not because the employer, though, is using the same metrics to choose their
It
people?
could well be. It could well
Yeah.
be. It's hard to identify the causation here and what's essentially a signalling effect. But so the point is, we can't lose sight of the need to have those academic skills, but also we need to find a better balance in our accountability system, I think, that recognises that there's more attributes that are important for young people to achieve.
Yeah, let's open this out to the floor now. Is there anyone who'd like to ask a question to our panel at this point? If so, put your hand up and we'll get a microphone towards you. Yeah, just... Do you want to just shout it? I'll repeat it if you can't.
Brian Hurst, Royal Society.
Yeah.
One of the things we're looking at is about, let's talk about the narrowness of the post-16 curriculum.
Yeah.
And the question about preparing young people not just for their first job, but for a lifetime of work.
Yeah.
What is the kind of think about the what about thinking about employability in those kind of terms, and that applies just as much for those people through the A-level track or through vocational track. With the future of work that is jobs that exist now may not exist in 5 years' time, never mind throughout a whole lifetime of work.
Yeah, so it's about, how do you make sure you prepare young people for the fact that the job market changes so much? Yeah, do you want to pick us up on that? Because that's basically your job, isn't it? To look at how things are changing and make sure everyone...
It is, and I think about the accounting profession, particularly digital AI, the role of business more broadly, it's changing, and it's changing at an ever faster pace. And then I think about my 8-year-old son, who's at primary school at the moment, and I think, gosh, you're going to live longer than we are. The next generation are living longer. Unfortunately, you're going to be working longer, your working career. I'm going to be working till I'm 67 at the moment, I think it is. That's no doubt going to be longer for the kids that are in school today. So, and this whole idea of a career for life, I think is already, a job for life, is already behind us. So you're absolutely right that this is about, I did a piece of research while I was at CIPD looking at careers, and they were talking about in the future we'll have 2 or 3 big careers during our life. So there needs to be this thing of a real, genuine approach to lifelong learning and recognising and making it easier in society to have big changes in careers. At ACCA, we're thinking increasingly about modularisation. We're thinking about just-in-time learning. Those sorts of things that would come from a manufacturing base in the past, but actually we're starting to think and apply them to education. So it's very much about lifelong learning, opportunities to change, and I think that means changing some of our systems, because our systems are very much set up at the moment. Apprenticeships have been traditionally, this is something young people do. T-levels is very much focused on young people, and we don't think about education much. Once you hit your 20s, it's almost, well, you've learned everything. Now you're in your jobs, and that's your career, and it's over to your employer now to upskill you and for your career to evolve. And I think we need to change our mindsets.
So you think there should be a lifelong relationship between educators, learners, people in jobs?
That's because, I'm going to show my age now, so I don't think anybody cares, but when, in the 70s and 80s when I was at school, and I was a teenager in the 1980s, when you left school, and I was at a free grammar school. That might polarise people, but and it still is there. It was just like, at the age of 16 or 18, whichever, it was just like another episode from Mr. Ben, where you have a whole row of different outfits, and you have to try them on, and the most pressing question of all is, what will you be? What will you be? What are you going to be? And nobody posed the question to me, who are you going to be?
Yeah.
But there isn't the time to ask that. And I'm having exactly the same question again with my son, Henry, who's 18. He feels under tremendous pressure to decide what he's going to be, well before he's established who he's going to be. Now, I know that sounds a bit waffly, and we need to unpick that and try and codify that in some way. But I do think at the heart of that, there is this terrible sense of urgency to decide what you're going to be. Earlier than 18, certainly at 16 when you're choosing your GCSEs, which will then go on to shape and inform your A-levels and so on.
Yeah.
And we get into this terrible sense of urgency. And as people have said on the panel already, people will have a whole range of different careers, as I have done in their career, portfolio careers and so on. So it's very important to establish what you're going to be and who you're going to be. To achieve what you want is almost invariably possible, but knowing what you want is a very difficult thing to establish, and that takes time.
Yeah, yeah. Charlie, what are your thoughts on what could be done to? Have you got a microphone? Yeah. Yeah. What are your thoughts then on how we do this, how we achieve this, making sure people are thinking about who they want to be? Right?
So I think it's a bit difficult because, like Andrew said, it's hard for us to know what we really want to be doing. And even now, if you're a university graduate, it's hard to know what you want to be doing in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So how to prepare for that. But I think in engineering especially, we're quite lucky because we have the Institute of Engineering and Technology, and they are a link between education and industry and can advise us on sort of what is prevalent or upcoming in industry and what we should be focusing on to prepare for that. But that's still only 5 years in the future at best, and then looking at 10, 20, 30 of what we'll be doing for our entire careers is quite difficult, I think.
Yeah. Are there any other questions from the floor at this point? Yeah. Well, yeah, there's the mic.
I'd just like to pick up on something that Natalie first spoke about, which is the trust balance in the accountability system. I just wonder what the panel thought about Ofsted's focus on the new framework to do with the curriculum, and if this presents a real opportunity for schools, particularly, to actually begin to think about broad and balanced curriculum in these.
Yeah, so the Ofsted new framework, do you think it's an opportunity to broaden schools in terms of what they're offering?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a positive step forward, and I think it signals that change under Amanda Spielman and what she's looking for. Nevertheless, we still have performance tables, schooling tables that are about academic attainment and progress. And so I think that yes, the Ofsted framework is a step forward. There are things I think that it doesn't deal with, but I think the focus on curriculum is a positive one.
Yeah, is anybody else wants to? Cindy, do you want to?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's Natalie's point about the performance tables, and actually that drives the behaviours in schools and for teachers. There's an awful lot of pressure to meet those measures. I think it's interesting that it's an opportunity probably to relook at how curriculum is redesigned and include some of those really important elements. So I said earlier, I've only been in education 10 years, and when I left City and Islington, at my speech, one of the things I said was that one of the most powerful things in whether or not somebody is successful or not is not so much the academics. It is important, I'm not disagreeing with you, Natalie, but it's the enrichment piece. It's all the other bits. And actually, I think the real opportunity is us thinking about how we embed enrichment in curriculum and in learning. That's what I would be looking at.
How we observe it too. You're right, if I may say, to mention the new changes in Ofsted and so forth. And I was doing a course for the staff at my school only the other day. You're pulling apart, and there's a little bit of housekeeping to be done, frankly, and a bit of nomenclature from their point of view and how they report on it. Really, I think that's where the significant shifts are. You have a discrete personal development topic and behaviour and attitudes. I loved it when I saw the behaviour and attitudes. I thought that was great. And then a few other different bits and pieces that are now going to be wrapped into quality of education, including outcomes, which is good. But the behaviour and attitudes is great. What I'm interested in is to see how they're going to allow us to present that and how that can be observable, because it is observable. It is observable. I know it is, because we've tried doing that in our school, and it's observable and it's presentable through case studies and quantitative and qualitative.
So do you think it can be measurable then?
Absolutely. Well, it isn't, I keep saying it, but it is. And I think if Ofsted inspectors, I'm sure they are human beings, and they're teachers, I'm sure many of them.
Are they human?
Well, they're circling in our area at the moment, so we're preparing for it. But I do know that I hope that they are able to have that whole lens, that they're not myopic, they're able to see the whole child. Of course they are. And they want to see impact. Intention, as you know, intent, implementation, and impact. And the only way we're going to have the opportunity to show that impact is if they're going to, and I'm sure they will welcome, case studies and commentaries to show that we have observed on and can report meaningfully on those attitudes, behaviours, and capacities above the academic grade.
Yeah, I know quite a few of you still want to speak, but let me take in a couple of questions if we get more questions.
Quick question. I was pleased the young lady mentioned the new Ofsted approach. I'm sure this will help. But as a trustee or a governor of a school down in Kent has moved from requires improvement to good, the pressure, the short-term immediate pressure to get good exam results is vitally important.
Yeah.
So whilst all the ladies and gentlemen are here, and I'm sure everybody here would agree we're going in the right direction, time is what is a terrible pressure.
Yeah.
And there's clearly a need to move to remove the stigma between academic and vocational, jobs where you get your hands dirty and jobs where you don't. But in the short term, the pressure on us as governors, trustees of a large school in Kent is to get the exam results up.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reality they all face, isn't it?
Yeah, and one of the interesting things, Ofsted say they're going to focus more on curriculum. But what happens if Ofsted thinks that a school has a great curriculum, it's broad, it's balanced, it's enriched, it's evidence-based, but they have poor results? What happens to the school then where the DFE and Ofsted might come into conflict?
Yeah, and I go to schools like that all the time. You know, I spend my life visiting schools in often some really deprived areas, and they're doing amazing things for those young people. Yet every teacher is battered and weighed down by Ofsted telling them they're shit. Which is that's the direct quote. That's the, you know, it's really hard to get over that. Should we take some more questions because I'm conscious of time? Yeah.
Oh, hello. So I'm just touching on the point about the stigma with BTECs.
The stigma around them, yeah.
So at the moment, I know there's the new curriculum coming in place to work at a college where they're putting more of an onus on exams.
Yeah.
So I think even in the BTEC sense, I've heard that there might be some exams. Statistically, some students they're measured on where they do really well in coursework-based subjects, but then when it gets to exams, they kind of have anxiety. So I just think, what would be the benefit of changing it to exams? Because even in the case where we have obviously one of the front runners for Prime Minister Mark Gove, he said that there shouldn't be coursework for a compelling case, and I feel as if it's when you go to some other universities, they'll say we don't want BTECs, we don't want any vocational at all. So it's just why the government.
Yeah. So how does that all marry up?
Yeah.
Because inevitably there are always going to be people who find exams tricky. I mean, Cindy, do you want to pick up on this because you mentioned BTECs?
I mean, I think you kind of need to measure, and I think it comes back to trust. But actually, something that you said, which I think is really powerful, you can get an A star in maths and still be really rubbish in life or actually in your role. So, and I say this as someone who's new to education relatively, which is we measure everything by the same standard, and kids and human beings are not homogenous. And I think actually finding the right balance of assessing by looking at project work and other skills, I think is equally as important as just looking at it just through the lens of exams. Because actually, if you look at it through the lens of just exams, you're setting a lot of very bright kids up to fail.
Yeah. Can I just bring in as well, because obviously we've talked about educators, we've talked about the learners, but what about business as well in all of this? And talking about policy, is there a bigger role for business? Because I've constantly got businesses saying to me, we want to get into schools, we want to do things. It's hard given the curriculum, but yeah, do you want to get on?
I think from my perspective, business has, like it or not, been drawn much more closely into the education system through things like Trailblazer apprenticeships. Suddenly they're building apprenticeship standards, they're inputting to, if not completely designing assessment strategies. But that's not what those businesses do. So I think therefore the right approach is a collaboration. It's working with educational expertise and using business to bring their insights in terms of content, curriculum, capabilities that they need from their talent. And if we can marry the two together, I think that makes sense. But back to your question about exams, I do agree. I used to work, for example, with the Institute of Hospitality.